The Washington Commanders host the New York Giants this Sunday. And we've got your game preview here with legendary player and Super Bowl winner Carl Banks. Let's go. Greetings and salutations. Welcome to Ref the District's game preview for the New York Football Giants against the Washington Commanders. I'm Nathan Perry. That's the Stoner here on the Believe Network. Washington currently more than a touchdown favorite for what I believe might be the second time this season, maybe third. I'm not sure about Chicago, but I am sure about one thing, Stoner, and that's that people can head out to Bet Online either on their browser or through the mobile app. Use the code BELIEVE, BLEAV, to get a 50% welcome bonus, and they can put their own money down on the game here this Sunday. They can put it on NFL games. They can put it on their hockey games. They can put it on college basketball. Iowa was upset this week. You never know what's going to happen until you know. Let's Bet Online, where the game starts. Stoner, this, even with Washington being heavy favorites, this has got to be a dogfight, as neither team has really shown that they've come around this season.
Yeah, I got news for you though, Nathan. I don't think it's going to be a dogfight. I think it's going to be a cakewalk for Washington. The Giants, I know I've said this a million times and been wrong a million times. The Giants stink. And as bad as Washington's been, they're better than the current New York Giants team. The current makeup of Danny DeVito's nephew and Saquon Barkley banged up, and the offensive line banged up, and Thibodeau banged up, and all this other stuff.
Ballers out. Yeah, there's just no one.
Yeah, come on. This is not an NFL team that they're bringing out there this Sunday, so it should be a cakewalk. But then again, this is Washington. This is kind of what we do. We play down to our competition. We'll play the Eagles tough, and then we'll get blown out by the Bears. So it should be a cakewalk, Nathan. It shouldn't be a tough game, but, we'll see. That's my prediction. It's going to be a cakewalk. It's going to be a double-digit victory. If you want to go to Bet Online and put all your money on that, say Stoner told you so, go for it.
Please do not. We do not advise doing that. We cannot pay you back if you lose big, but you can do that Bet Online if you want, but just don't pin it on us, please. Yeah. And thank you. Right. I want to know whether or not Carl Banks, a legendary Giants player, 1 year in Washington, although a bit of a forgettable season there with that transition team, has to say about it, because this is a rivalry, I think, that has kind of gone to the wayside, Stoner. It used to be kind of, they really would butt heads his day, right? Like they would butt heads and they would hate each other, compared to now where maybe not so much. So welcome to the channel, Carl Banks from the Believe in Giants podcast.
It was one of those deals where I don't think I was ever really accepted as a Redskin, because, our rivalry was our rivalry. And, I guess so naive of me to think because we won most of those games that it was going to be all good once I was in their uniform, but it just didn't work that way. So
yeah, it's a little different these days, isn't it? Right, where these days everybody's a friend and friendly and everything, but you literally went from a hated team to the opponent, and can't imagine that went over very well with anybody.
Yeah, it was not great. I can tell you that I had a few friends on the team though, like Kurt Gobert, Mark Collins, Monty Coleman were really cool. But I didn't have many friends on that team. I said Mark Collins, Andre Collins.
We appreciate you giving us some time, especially this guy right here, because he's a little bit of a fanboy. You probably don't remember meeting him nearly 40 years ago.
Wow.
This is true, Carl. Check this out. I busted this out of my old scrapbook. This is an autograph.
Oh my goodness, look at that.
From Carl Banks, number 58 New York Giants, and also Lonnie Young. You remember, of course, Lonnie. You went to high school, college with them at Michigan State.
Yep.
I am also a proud Spartan. I also was born in Flint, way back in the day, 1969, way back in the day.
Yeah.
So where I was, my last name is Stone. I could be considered the original Flintstone from
The
back in the day
original
before all
Flintstone.
those
There we
guys.
go. My man.
Yeah, but let me ask you about a little bit about that whole experience. Growing up in Flint and going to Michigan State, how did that sort of it was a car auto town. Flint was, of course, manufacturing. It was kind of a tough town to grow up in. How did that prepare you for going on to professional football and in the rest of your life?
Well, we had really good community, if you will. I think all of our athletes in Flint were very supported through through our community, and it prepared me for college, right? So, and I think the reason I chose Michigan State over any other college was because of your current owner, Magic Johnson.
Sure.
Magic Johnson and I met each other at his basketball camp when I was like a sophomore or junior in high school. And we became friends. And, Michigan State was in a bad place when I was coming out of high school. And I was being, this stoner, like back then, the Oklahoma Sooners were the gold standard. And I had just come from a trip, and Barry Switzer offered me a scholarship and a bunch of other stuff too, by the way. But and I came back, and then I had all the other Big Ten schools recruiting as well, and I was pretty highly recruited. But I met with Magic. We had known each other, since basketball camp, and he didn't oversell me, but he told me it would be the greatest experience I ever had, and it's a beautiful campus. All of that stuff. And I said, well, if you say so, I'm doing it. And I did it, and the coach that recruited me didn't even coach me a single game. Darryl Rogers left before the season even started. So I was like, but it served as kind of, it was kind of like we grew up in Flint, right? We were against odds in a lot of different areas, nobody thought this small town of 100,000 people could produce so many athletes, and we just do it, And so when I got to Michigan State, I understood winning. I understood, what it took. Didn't have a lot of teammates at that point that were willing to buy in, and we had some bad coaching. But when George Perlis came, it was different. So, yeah, Flint prepares you for life, man. Blue collar. It's get it done. I was in. I think ever since my sophomore year or freshman year, I worked in the cemetery, Graceline Cemetery, from that point all the way through college, right? And you talk about life lessons there. You work beside ex-convicts or guys that are transitioning back into society that, because Flint is so small, everybody knows who everybody is. So,
Sure.
These guys are giving me life lessons on, what to stay away from and, rooting me on. And this was not unique just to me. I mean, there was a lot of love in Flint for people that were trying to do good things.
Well, let's transition into the game that's happening this Sunday. The New York Football Giants playing on Sunday are a far cry from your Super Bowl years with them a long time ago. Now, you mentioned Magic Johnson. Maybe he can convince you to come out to FedEx Field in your Washington jersey, not the New York jersey, Carl.
Man.
This is a team that last year showed a lot of promise. You paid Dan Jones a lot of money. He ends up getting injured. Tyrod Taylor is a fine replacement for him, but also gets injured. This team seems in serious disarray. Why the big disconnect from last year, do you think, Carl, where they were a team that looked like maybe on the rise, Dabble coach of the year, to this at this point, Dabble looks like he could be in the hot seat.
Yeah, I think that's a great question because when training camp started, I said they have more talent than they had last year, just through the free agency acquisitions and the drafting. And I said the biggest test will be whether or not they play to their talent level. I think there are a multitude of reasons that you can point to. But right now they're not a good football team, and that's, I'm not going to sugarcoat it when, you can't keep your quarterback healthy and there are just a lot of mistakes. And, Daniel Jones did not make great decisions at times during games. And I can understand why. Two things can be true. When you get hit, the amount of times he gets hit per game, it impairs your decision-making process. And eventually it ended up getting him knocked out of the game. And then he comes back and he has a knee injury. So two things can be true, but anybody that has played, especially in the era in which I have played in, our games, there was always a scouting report on quarterbacks. And and I'm sure there's one now. If you go to any of go to the Commanders defensive player and ask them, hey, do you guys have a book on Daniel Jones? Did you guys have a book on Daniel Jones? They would be like, yeah, the book is, if you could hit him enough times early, he's going to, miss some reads or make some mistakes. But that's unique. That's not unique to him. It's to every quarterback in the NFL. I think what has happened is that the offensive line has struggled. They struggled for like 6 straight games. They just didn't even communicate. They were turning guys loose, and they were free runners to the quarterback. And, it's one thing to have an offensive line that doesn't hold up against good players, right? But at least your quarterback everybody knows their assignment, and you can make adjustments according to that. But when you have free runners to a quarterback and guys are blowing assignments and they're tackles for loss, that's not functional, and it's not sustainable for your team. Now, aside from the Dallas game, which I think they regressed a bit, their offensive line had been communicating a lot better over the last 2 or 3 games, but not good enough. And, they're doing, I think they produce 11.5 points a game.
Yeah,
that's
not a very good offense.
That's not good. Right. Yeah. That's not good. So there are a lot of things you can point to, but right now it's bad football. I mean, you can make any excuse, but the good news is they're fighting in their weight class this week. They're not punching. No, they're not punching above their weight class, and that's no disrespect. I mean, it is what it is. Both of these teams, when you look at where they are, it's this is a weight class game. You're not punching up in weight class. You're not, apples to apples. Washington has their issues too. Yeah. You know what I mean? So they can look at this and say, okay, this is something, if you execute, you should feel good about. But they're not good enough to overcome mistakes and blown assignments. They just don't have enough talent up front to really get that done.
Yeah, and Carl, you're a great follow on Twitter. If you're not following Carl, it's at Carl Banks GIII. And Carl, lately you've been really talking about the offensive line and how that has negatively affected. But looking at it from a defensive perspective, from a linebacker's perspective, how important was it for you? And of course, how important is it now to terrorize the quarterback, to get the quarterback out of his mindset of what he needs to do? And that seems to be what's affecting all quarterbacks nowadays. But how important is it for these linebackers and these defensive lines to get to the quarterback?
It is the most important aspect of the game now because of the rule changes in how defenders, especially cornerbacks, can defend. And then you have these 5-yard penalties, you have these 15-yard penalties. So, I mean, you got to be able to get to the quarterback and impact how they play because, when they break the huddle, he has the ball in his hands. He's controlling the offense. So you want to be able to impact his decision-making. So that hasn't changed over the years, but I think it's more important now because of the way the rules are slanted towards the offense.
Well, you mentioned how getting after the quarterback is kind of the key. All quarterbacks will get rattled if you get in their face that way. Sam Howell was taken down 6 times against the Giants earlier this season, but you trade away one of the pieces that was terrorizing him that game. Washington changes some of their offensive line, and Thibodeau is nursing an injury as well. How well do you think the Giants are going to be able to get after Sam Howell and this Commanders offense?
Hmm. It's TBD. The Commanders have 2 really good running backs. They've got the most underrated wide receiver outside of the NFC East in Terry McCurlin, where nobody seems to want to give this kid credit, but he's as good as they come. He's good early and he's good late. So that's why, Washington's never out of games because of a guy like him. So you cannot, if you're the Giants, you can't allow Washington to be 2-dimensional, because if they're 2-dimensional, it's going to be a long day. And they just gave up 600 plus yards to the Dallas Cowboys. So they've got to be able to focus on, limiting the 2 running backs and or the wide receiver, because he is legit. Like, he's really, really one of the best in the league, and nobody wants to give him credit outside of this division.
And Carl, I was curious also about how, when you were playing and the rivalry was at its peak, really, between the Giants and the Redskins, and it's kind of fallen off, right? Because the Redskins / Commanders have not been a good team for quite a while. What does it mean to the NFL to have this sort of rivalry be renewed and get back to what it was in the 80s and 90s?
Well, I think it's good foundational football, because we have, teams with global profiles, and then they're football teams, right? And you want to have these rivalries between every team in divisions. Like, if you look at the AFC North, that is what the NFC East used to be, right? Every game looked ugly, but then when you get outside of the division, everybody's like, wow, this team is really good. And that's where I really would love to see the NFC East, especially the Washington and Giants rivalry. That is the rivalry of all blue collar rivalries, if you will.
The blue collar workers there for both teams going to have to put in a lot of work. Maybe not necessarily blue collar, because he's got some fancy footwork, as Saquon Barkley, but he is an absolute workhorse back. But he also is nursing an injury, and if he were healthy, it'd be a tall task to put the offense on his back, but he can do it. He's not healthy. He's got Danny DeVito's cousin, brother, sister's family member. Tommy DeVito is the quarterback.
Yeah.
How can Saquon, or do you believe Saquon can still take over a game in this status with a patchwork offensive line, a 3rd-string quarterback pulled off the streets? Saquon Barkley's got a tall task in front of him.
Well, you play the cards you're dealt, Nathan, and everybody's injured this time of year. Nobody's healthy. I know for a fact, if Saquon Barkley puts a jersey on, he expects himself to play like Saquon Barkley. If he can't play, then he's not going to have a jersey on. So I would say to any opponent, expect his best, because that's what it's going to be. If he's able to get dressed, he's gonna be Saquon Barkley. And like I said, everybody's dealing with something this time of year, so you don't discount it if your best players are actually dressed and ready to go.
All right, Carl, my last question for you. I mean, I could talk to you for hours, talk about Michigan State, Flint, all that good stuff, Giants, Redskins rivalry. But my last question for you is, do you think that next year the Giants are drafting a quarterback?
I think that's a TBD too. I think the real homework that has to be done is, assessing Daniel Jones. and then asking yourself, if there's another guy you bring in, will he fare any better with the surrounding pieces? I think there is a skill set that everyone likes about Daniel Jones. He's 6'6", he's mobile, he can throw the ball, and they've seen him play at a high level. He's won a playoff game for them. Should not be a distant memory because he played well in that game. So he shows you what he's capable of doing. And so, you have these generational supposedly quarterbacks every year, and some pan out, some don't. They just paid him. He's on the books at least for another year. So whether they draft or not, we'll find out. And then if they win games or other teams get worse, they may not be picking. But I think wherever they pick in the first round, they have to get it right. And then all of those players after that, because they've accumulated some draft choices, they got to figure out this offensive line. They have to. And, they're not the only team in the league that's dealing with this.
Sure.
Offensive linemen are probably the most premium position in football right now, outside of quarterback. Because you don't get a lot of good ones. So they've got to get that right. But I don't know if a quarterback's in their future or not. I think they've got some homework to do. And if it's not, I don't think they're going to overreach to take a lineman where he shouldn't be taken either. But they just got to get the talent right. That's all. They just got, whatever the acquisition is, make sure it's the right acquisition.
Got to get it right.
Washington has what they hope is their franchise quarterback of the future going up against the New York Giants this Sunday. Currently, Carl, you said it's going to be a close game, but on Bet Online, Washington more than a touchdown favorite at this point. What do you think the final score is going to be?
I have no idea. That part I never get into. Right.
Yeah.
Because the players play the game and there's just so many moving parts. Injuries occur, key players go down, just like in the game, the Thursday night football game, nobody knew that Joe Burrow would go down. I mean, I think, the line on that game was probably a lot closer than it ended up being. So you never know. So I'm not in the predicting game.
Good. That's a good game to not be into. Trust me.
Yeah.
There's a lot of money that way.
Well, it is going to be the Washington Commanders hosting the New York Giants. Carl, we thank you for joining us here on Ref the District. We're presented by Bet Online. I'm Nathan. That's the Stoner. And until next time,
the Flintstones always rule.
Be a fan.
Thank you for having me.